Good evening. My name is Blair Williams, and I'm the manager of OCRM Critical Area Permitting Section of the Department of Health and Environmental Control. At this time, I'd like to recognize Sarah Reed, who is the project manager for this request and in attendance tonight. DHEC's Office of Ocean and Coastal Resource Management's general charge is to protect the quality of the coastal environment and to promote economic and social improvement of the coastal zone. This mandate includes the wise management of coastal resources through the review of projects that propose impacts to those resources, including tidal wetlands in the 8 coastal counties through the Coastal Zone Management Act, the Department's Critical Area Permitting Regulations, and the Coastal Zone Consistency Certification Review. The critical area permitting responsibility of DHEC is the basis for this public hearing tonight, and our review is initiated upon receipt of a critical area permit application which was placed on public notice. This public notice is the document that most of you received. The original public notice advertised that Dr. John Manzi is proposing to make modifications to an existing private recreational dock at 267 Little Oak Drive. The modifications will consist of the addition of a 4-foot by 132-foot walkway with handrails on the channelward side of the existing pierhead, leading to a new 10-foot by 16-foot pierhead with handrails. In addition, a single pile 6-foot by 8-foot boat lift is proposed to be installed on the ebb side of the new pierhead. This proposed activity is located on and adjacent to a tributary of the Folly River in James Island, Charleston County, South Carolina. It is the responsibility of the department to accept applications and review them in an unbiased manner, as staff is charged with interpreting state law and regulations. No decision is made until such time as the file is administratively complete and until all necessary facts have been gathered. In that regard, this hearing is designed to gather comments as to the merits of the project, then consider all information when making a decision based on the Coastal Zone Management Act, department regulations, and policies. The specific regulations that will be reviewed for this project will be Regulation 30-11B and C, which are standards that apply to all projects, and Regulation 30-12A, which are the regulations specific to docks and piers. Additionally, staff will base the decision upon applicable policies in the Coastal Zone Management Plan. For your reference, there are electronic copies of the public notice postcard and the submitted drawings showing the proposed modifications in both a plan view and cross-section view, available for download at scdhec.gov/Manzi by clicking the public notice link under Downloads and Links. At this time, I would like to invite the applicant, Dr. Manzi, to describe his project. Dr. Manzi?
I think I unmuted. Am I unmute?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. This will take just a few minutes. I'd like to just start by describing how we got here, and it's a simple story. Our dock, as it presently stands, can I have the first slide? Sits in an area of high and low marsh vegetation. There isn't much water around it. This was in a creek at one time. This was Quahog Creek. When we developed the island, I actually named that creek after my favorite invertebrate. And at that time, it was actually a pretty substantial creek. It even had water in it at low tide. Anyway, sections of that creek have filled in my home, in front of my home in particular. So this dock has become relatively unusable. You can't fish from it, you can't shrimp from it, you can't crab from it, you certainly can't swim from it, and more importantly, or most importantly, you can't launch a boat from it. So I inquired with OCRM whether I could install a single pole boat lift at the existing dock and expand the size of the pierhead. And they counseled me at the time that this was not advisable, that they would probably not grant such a permit because of the location of the pierhead now, which is not in navigable waters. They did suggest that one option would be to extend to the next creek, which does have water in it most of the time. As a matter of fact, most low tides, it's got water in it. And said that they would certainly allow us to go through the permit application with that in mind. And so that's what we did. And of course, that opened a Pandora's box. We happened to live next to a condominium development, and the people in the condos, although they could presently see my existing dock, felt that their lives would be impacted negatively if they could see the dock extension. So they mounted a campaign, the COVID version of door to door, and generated enough opposition that this public hearing is the result. So that's how we came to be. OCRM did supply me with, could I have the next slide, please? OCRM did supply me with all the permit objections, and so I was able to compile them into 4 distinct subjects. Next slide, please. These were just 3 views. This happens to be from my neighbor's dock that give you a pretty good indication of how landlocked my dock presently is. It is a good place for my martin pole, but that's about it. All these shots were taken in August of this year. What I've done is compile those objections into 4 categories, 4 major areas of objection. And the first was navigation. Obviously, we're starting off on the wrong foot since I can't get a boat lift there. It is obviously not a navigable creek. So, but our neighbors felt that they used the creek often enough for their kayaks for my new extension to be an obstruction. And there's little to support that. About 99.9% of the traffic that goes by my house in the creek to which we want to extend. And as a matter of fact, from my count, what we have seen from our home since January, there have been exactly 4 occasions where people used the remnants of Quahog Creek at high tide to float over the marsh grass. So I would not call this extensive use. And one of those 4 times, by the way, was a photo op staged by our condominium neighbors who put a couple of kayakers by our dock and then all came outside to shoot pictures. I've got some cute video of that. What we're dealing with is a non-navigable creek and very little traffic by it. However, if there is great concern about this, can I have the next slide, please? There's a workaround, and as a matter of fact, if you look at this slide, the red dot, the red drop pin is my dock. The blue areas are my home, obviously. So you can see the dock is pretty well surrounded by marsh. The actual channel for Quahog Creek now is the upper green arrow. Water goes in and out of the upper part of Quahog Creek via the next navigable creek, and it exits and enters the lower part of Quahog Creek through the lower part of that navigable creek, and you can see that by the other green arrow, by the lower green arrow. So people who do want to continue along Quahog Creek could come down the creek, go out into the navigable creek, and then if they want to, they could come back into Quahog Creek past my house. So there's in essence a detour around any extension that I would make. Whoops. Anyway, if that's not enough, if there's still people who feel that their lives would be greatly impacted by my dock extension, Judy and I have agreed that we would arch the dock, we would arch the walkway, and we'd arch it high enough so that at the average tide, a kayaker could easily paddle paddle under the walkway. So I don't think navigation is a valid excuse. Can I have the next slide, please? Well, I guess we're not going to get slides, but the next slide actually showed a couple of people who were trying to improve upon nature by running back and forth in front of our dock with a shallow draft boat with an outboard motor. In essence, ditching or creating a ditch in front of our house, I guess to show that that it was navigable, but I'm not sure exactly what their motivations were. Anyway, they were successful in creating a ditch, and about 2 feet wide and about 70 feet long that meandered through the low marsh. And of course, this was an egregious thing to do. You don't intentionally damage marsh grass. So unfortunately, they did this. I did have videos of it, and I have submitted it to DHEC's Office of Compliance to see if they want to pursue any issues associated with this. Could you go back to the first slide, please? Slide 11. So that takes care of the first issue, navigation. The second issue is really two things. One was there's been a general rumor that there is ownership, that the homeowners association owns the marsh around Little Oak, and therefore nothing can be done without their approval. And of course, that's not the case. You need a King's grant to show that kind of ownership. And as a matter of fact, when we were developing the island, we felt that that would be a great thing to have, and we pursued that issue, and were soundly rebuked in regards to that ownership. Apparently, you do need that King's grant, and we did not have it. And I'm assuming the homeowners association doesn't have it either. The second part of that is that there was a fear that if this dock extension was allowed, that it would set a precedent in other areas of the island where indeed an extension might block a navigable route. This is not the case. OCRM evaluates all of the permits on their own merits, and any permit that did block navigation, I'm sure would not be approved. So both of those issues are not valid. A third compilation of objections is my favorite. It's the environmental issues, and there were a slew of environmental issues that were mentioned, including my dock would prohibit dolphins from feeding, would prohibit strand feeding, would prohibit bird migration, bird feeding, water flow, tidal impact, the curvature of the earth, you name it. There were many environmental suggestions. I'm a marine biologist by profession. I've got a doctorate in marine science. I've published hundreds of papers and presentations. And I worked for 40 years in state, federal, and private industry in the marine environment. The last 30 years in the coastal waters of South Carolina, coastal waters and marshes of South Carolina. And in our profession, we have a lot of technical terms. And one of those technical terms deals exactly with these kinds of assertions or accusations or statements about impacts such as these. And that technical term is baloney. All of those objections are spurious. There is absolutely no indication that docks do these kinds of things, or that my dock in particular would. As a matter of fact, in the long run, and it's almost anticlimactic to say it, in the long run, docks actually create an edge effect, and eventually creating a greater biodiversity in areas where the dock is, particularly in the epifauna. So I think that's it. Now, the fourth objection is, of course, the one that is really driving this. And if our friends here in the neighborhood were honest, they would admit that the big issue here is view. They will be able to see my dock, and that view is apparently not very attractive to them. I wish we could do something about that. We have, to some degree. The initial dock permit included a full-size pierhead and a ramp and a floating dock and a 4-pole a boat lift with a roof. We reduced that practically down to the bare essentials: a much smaller pierhead and a single pole boat lift. That was it. So I think we did everything we possibly could to negate as much of the view that people might think was unattractive. However, obviously, to some of those folks, this wasn't enough. Judy and I bought our property, built our home here with the expectation that anybody who buys property on the coast of South Carolina and has water access will enjoy that water access. We'll be able to build a dock to take advantage of that water access, so that they could have a boat, that they could fish and shrimp and crab off their dock. And so all we're asking for is the same thing that every other resident of South Carolina enjoys if they're lucky enough to have property with water access. And that's all we're asking. And when we bought our property, we looked at all the ramifications of living in a community such as this. We looked at the covenants and restrictions, at the bylaws, at the guidelines for the Architectural Review Board. And there was nothing in those documents that prevent us from doing what we're asking to do. I just don't think that this is going to be as damaging as people think, and that we are just asking for something that is commonplace everywhere else, and we should not be penalized because we live next to a condominium development. So that's about it, except I do have a spoiler. This is a spoiler alert. I'm sure that you'll hear in comments that the board of directors of the HOA have notified me that they're not in favor of this extension. And I've also heard from the Architectural Review Board, even though we never formally applied to the Architectural Review Board, they felt they had enough material to say that they were not in favor of our dock extension. Now, interestingly enough, the majority of both the board of directors and the ARB, who happen to be the same people, the majority vote on both of those groups all happen to live in the condominiums. So I don't think that we would get a fair hearing under those kinds of circumstances. But be it as it may, I'm sure you will hear that they have decided not to be in favor of our project. Mr. Williams, that concludes my comments. So back over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Manzi. Once we begin the public comment portion of the hearing, we will invite all persons that registered to speak to make a statement for the record first. Afterward, we will invite any others to comment, and instructions on how to do so will be provided at that time. The only remarks allowed will be from the person called to speak, and each speaker will be allowed 3 minutes. I would advise those who plan to speak to limit your comments to the project at hand, which is to make modifications to an existing private recreational dock on and adjacent to a tributary of the Folly River. Please remember that the purpose of this hearing is to allow interested persons to make a statement for the record, which will be reviewed by OCRM staff prior to a decision. For the sake of accuracy, important facts should be submitted in writing. Please submit comments by visiting scdhec.gov/Manzi and clicking Submit a comment under Downloads and Links. You may also submit comments by way of mail or email through September 29th, 2020 to the project manager, Sarah Reed, at 1362 McMillan Avenue, Suite 400, Charleston, South Carolina, 29405, or email at reeds2@dhec.sc.gov. To make certain we gather all presented information, direct questioning during the hearing will not be allowed. Laura, I think we're ready to begin the public comment portion of the evening's hearing.
Okay, great. Thanks, Blair. All right, first I would like to introduce Matthew Hauk, who is the president of the Little Oak Island HOA and would like to speak on behalf of the entire HOA board as well as two board directors, Dr. John Vina and Mr. Bob Manzi, who have surrendered their time to speak. Because he is speaking for several people, we are allotting him 9 minutes to speak. Mr. Hauk, are you ready? If you are, you can unmute by pressing the microphone on your computer screen or using *6 to unmute from your phone.
Okay, I am unmuted.
Great, we can hear you.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
All right. As you said, my name is Matthew Hauk. I've lived on Little Oak Island for almost 13 years, serving on the board of directors for both the community and condo associations for the past 8 years, and as president of the Community Association for the past 4 years. Little Oak Island Community Association is the governing body for the 32 lots and 54 condos included in the association, which encompasses the majority of the property on our private island. All but 2 of the 32 lots have been developed with single-family homes. In all of my time on the board, and certainly during my time in all of my time on the island, and certainly during my time on the board, there has not been an issue more universally, vocally, and passionately opposed by association members than has been Mr. Manzi's application to extend his existing dock 133 feet across the marsh from one tidal creek to another tidal creek. We are aware that as of early April, DEC had received at least 40 letters of opposition from Little Oak Island homeowners, and none of those were in support of this dock extension. The incorporation of Little Oak Island and creation of its governing documents took place in the early 90s by Little Oak Development LP. And I believe that Mr. Manzi did note that he was a partner in Little Oak Development Company, and as such was instrumental in the wording and rules of the governing documents for the community in conjunction with their sales and marketing of homes and lots on the island. In these governing documents for the association, the marsh is declared common area. The board controls use of the marsh and dock construction by property owners in its dual role as board and ARB. The applicant understands the board's role and, as he mentioned, has requested authorization to extend his dock. The board refused based on the negative effect it will have on other residents of the community. Little Oak Development LP, of which Mr. Manzi again was a partner, established these limitations on docks consistent with the developer's express intent in the governing documents to protect the community's values. What you're looking at now is a marketing brochure from that time, and it specifically points out Quahog Creek as a recreational amenity of the community. Next slide, please. It is important to note that Quahog Creek, a feature visible on all aerial imagery of the area and through which this dock extension would cross, isn't even shown on the permit drawings. This is a defect in the applicant's submittal. Additionally, residents of the condos will have their use and enjoyment of their property negatively impacted based on the proximity of the condos to the dock extension, yet the applicant didn't disclose the permit application to these residents despite their proximity to the project. OCRM's regulations provide that the determination of the existence of a navigable creek does not depend on a defined channel, but can be made based on an established history of navigational access or use. Next slide, please. Multiple community members and other members of the public use the area that the permit applicant proposes to cross over as a recreational water body. Next slide, please. There is extensive use by kayaks and small watercraft, including myself and my neighbors. The perceived benefit to one property owner for a dock extension is greatly outweighed by impeding the use of and enjoyment of Quahog Creek amenity by the whole community. Next slide, please. The current location of Mr. Manzi's dock provides him access to the same body of water as the dock extension provides. Mr. Manzi can take his boat in a northeasterly direction out of Quahog Creek and into the larger tributary to the Folly River without extending his dock. Quahog Creek is accessible for about 2 hours before and after high tide for a motorboat. There is a minimally longer access time for the tributary to the Folly River, the tidal creek to where Mr. Manzi wants to extend his dock. Next slide, please. And in fact, there are sandbars of ever increasing size on both sides of Mr. Manzi's proposed pierhead, further reducing any advantage gained by extending the dock. We trust that OCRM has witnessed these growing sandbars themselves and will take this into consideration when considering this application. Consequently, little to no additional utility will be created by an extension of a dock over and through an area regularly used for recreation by the public, but the public will lose access to that area. Low tide photos shown in the meeting invitation do not depict what the area looks like when the tide is rising. Next slide, please. The marsh grass depicted in low tide photos is covered, and eventually Quahog Creek connects with the tributary, and there is a wide expanse of water which provides significant recreational opportunities for the community and the public. The dock extension will limit those opportunities. Next slide, please. Excuse me. Additionally, every dock previously approved by OCRM for this side of the island, 10 docks, has its pierhead on Quahog Creek. None of these property owners have expressed support for this dock extension that we are aware of, and DHEC has letters of opposition from some. Approving this extension and subsequently other extensions could cut off access to navigation for the docks in between the extended docks, forcing them to extend their docks also for continued access. The precedent of permitting the 133-foot extension of one dock from one tidal creek to another could eventually result in requests for many more. Of course, it is the strong preference of our community that OCRM not issue the permit for this dock extension. Should OCRM decide to issue this permit, it must include a condition recognizing the board's authority and the need for approval from the board and the ARB for the dock extension. I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Houck. Next, I would like to invite Mary Shade, who is representing the Little Oak Island HOA, to speak briefly on behalf of the HOA board. Ms. Shade, you will be allotted the normal 3 minutes that all the commenters will be given. As Mrs. Shade unmutes, I will ask everyone to remain muted and to turn off your cameras until it is your turn to speak. Ms. Shade, if you are ready, we can proceed. You may unmute by clicking the microphone or using *6 if you're joining us by phone.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am, we can.
Okay. I think Mr. Houck, who's the president of the Community Association, did a good job summing up the association's concerns, which are not personal to him, but are submitted on behalf of the community. I'm focused on that part of the regulatory definition that a creek with an established history of navigational use may be considered navigable regarding its conditions. And I want to point out that it's OCRM who has established Quahog Creek as a creek with established navigational use. The Community Association Board did a FOIA request, and the board has shared the FOIA responses with me, and I haven't completed going through them, but it's approximately 20 or more permitting actions in and around Quahog Creek that were done over the past 20 plus years that include permit amendments in almost every instance for boat lifts on Quahog Creek. So if there's an established history of navigational use, it was established by the agency. It is definitely unfair to look at only low tide photos of the creek itself. And it would also be unfair to look only at high tide photos. But what the evidence will show you is that Quahog Creek is suitable for navigational use 2 hours before and 2 hours after high tide. And the increase in the amount of use that you're going to get by extending this dock is calculated in minutes and nothing more than minutes, not hours. We think it's a shame that the applicant hasn't been required to show Quahog Creek on his application, since it's been recognized by the agency for 20 plus years and 20 plus permits as providing a history of navigational use. We think that's a defect in the application. We think the applicant should be required to show the creek, to provide estimates or calculations of its navigational use time as compared with the extension to the larger water body, which at high tide merges with Quahog Creek. It's also important to note that in those permitting actions, marsh grass to marsh grass measurements were provided of Quahog Creek. They were as low as 20 and as high as 50 at certain locations. So we don't believe this is an appropriate creek to cross. Mr. Manzi mentioned the need of a King's Grant. Well, as a developer, he didn't believe a King's Grant was needed to authorize both the board and the ARB with authority to say no to docks in protection of community values and community interests. And in fact, a covenant that touches and concerns property is an enforceable covenant. Clearly, the marsh touches and concerns the upland, and a covenant related to limitations on docks is enforceable. And he wrote the covenant, or at least implicitly confirmed the viability of the covenant by being part of the development team. I do think it's important. Am I out of time?
I am apologizing. Yes, ma'am. The
okay,
time is going off.
I'm sorry, I missed the signal. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And if you do have additional comments that you would like to submit, please, we do encourage you to submit those in writing to the addresses on the screen, either by email or in mail, by U.S. mail.
I certainly will.
Thank you. All right, next we will call on Catherine Benazzi. Ms. Benazzi, if you can unmute your line on the computer, it is by clicking the microphone.
Yes.
And if you, great, thank you for joining us. You will be given 3 minutes, and there will be a little timer sound at the end of that 3 minutes. I hope you can hear it. If not, I may jump in.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. Oh dear, I'm getting feedback.
Ms. Benazzi, you may need to mute
Can you hear me now?
speakers on your computer so that they don't come in through the device. Ms. Benazzi, I've muted your line. You may need to turn your speakers down while you're talking so that we're not picking up that feedback while you provide your comment. So once you've done so, if you could go ahead and then re-unmute yourself, and we'll be happy to hear from you.
Okay, is that better?
That is much better. Thank you.
Can you hear? I actually can't hear you now. But Okay. Could you say something to me so I can see if I can hear you?
Yes, ma'am, we can hear you. Please proceed.
Okay, I'll just speak. All right. So my name is Catherine Benazzi. I live at 238 Little Oak Drive. I'm in the condominiums next door to Mr. Manzi's home. I oppose this application as the proposed dock extension would obstruct a navigable tidal channel known as Quahog Creek, which was omitted from the survey that Mr. Manzi submitted. This navigable creek is used by residents and the broader community for recreational purposes, kayaking, paddleboarding, and fishing. Many of the pictures that you've seen, I will attest, are not staged because I took some of them myself, and I know who took a number of those pictures. A couple of things that I think are really important to consider. I think it's really important to keep that inner channel open and available for use by the public. I think it's particularly important. There can be weather conditions, kayakers who become fatigued maybe when they're out on the water, and it is a much more protected route to get back to safety or back to shore. So I think that that's a key point. I'm also very concerned about the potential impact of the proposed 10 by 16 foot pier head. I'd like to mention that in the description on the DHEC web page, it described it as 10 by 6 feet instead of 10 by 16 feet. I think it should be considered whether it would have a negative impact on tidal flow. Perhaps a flow study, an independent flow study should be done if you guys are going to consider authorizing this. It could potentially limit safe passage of users through this channel, especially if weather events in the future cause a shift in the deeper part of the channel to the northern side. Mr. Manzi's photos showed two cuts between Quahog Creek and the second channel where he proposes to put the dock. You have in some of the pictures that you've seen, you can see that the first cut that's to the east empties out right where a large sandbar is. The westernmost cut is right in front of my home. And somewhere in that slide deck, I think there are pictures of that cut, which is beginning to fill up with oyster beds and some mud bars. So I don't know if it's possible to see any of those. If there are any more pictures in the slide deck that Matt had.
Ms. Benazzi, you have 30 seconds left.
I will be submitting all of my pictures. But I think that it's not necessarily true that we could always rely on those cuts being there to go around the Manzi's dock if they were permitted to build it there. I'd like to also note there are significant sandbars at the entrance to the second channel. I don't know most of the time what size boat would be comfortable going through there. I think any boat more than a small John boat would be very comfortable trying to go through that passageway. So let me see what else.
Ms. Benazzi?
So I'm going to follow up with pictures to support the active use of the creek in real life, pictures of paddleboarders, kayakers, people in a John boat, and other pictures to support the points that I've made. I urge you to deny this application as the construction of this dock provides little benefit to the homeowner while negatively impacting the entire community. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Benazzi. We do appreciate those comments, and if you could submit them to the e-permitting webpage, that would be really helpful, and include those pictures that you were mentioning. That webpage is found at, you can link to it from the scdhec.gov/Manzi webpage. Next, we will call up Ms. Theodora Liebman. And I hope I'm pronouncing your last name correctly.
Yes. I just wanted to briefly say that I know the Manzis personally, and I don't think that they would do anything that would negatively impact the environment. I mean, that's Mr. Manzi's education, and I just feel like everybody has enjoyment to their property. I don't live in the condos, but I certainly don't understand why the extension of a dock would be devastating to their view or their livelihood. And I think if anybody's going to do this, that the Manzi certainly would do it properly. I understand both sides of that, but that's basically what I have to say. I think there's some discrepancies here that need to be worked through about who owns the marsh. But once that can be worked out, I certainly think it should be considered. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Leitman. Next, we will call on Nancy Hadley. Ms. Hadley, if you can unmute by using the microphone on your screen or using star 6. Yes, ma'am. You will have 3 minutes. Please proceed.
Thank you. I have known the Manzis since the early 80s when John worked with the Department of Natural Resources, and I agree that it's that John would not damage the natural resources in the construction of a dock. It looks to me like through no fault of their own, their dock has become unusable, and apparently OCRM agrees because they won't give them any assistance in how to make it more usable. Their only suggestion was to extend the dock or to apply to extend the dock. I think it's a reasonable request, and I think it should be granted. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hadley. Next, we will call on Mr. Richard Beck. Mr. Beck, you can unmute by clicking the microphone or using star 6 if you're joining us by phone.
How's that? Is that working?
Yes, sir. We can hear you. Please proceed. You'll have 3 minutes.
Thank you. My name is Richard Beck, and I've lived on the marsh with a small dock, Tidal Creek, for 40 years. And I live along a creek where there are other docks. And having lived there 40 years, it's my experience that reasonable access to a navigable channel has become kind of completely commonplace. That's just something that is done if at all possible. My experience in my own creek is that channels meander and docks have to be adjusted. Docks have had to be shortened. Docks have had to be lengthened in order for the person to have access to water that can actually float a boat in. And this, I think this is such a case, and I believe it's a common experience. To object on the basis of compromise of view seems unreasonable. If every DAPA application were trumped by concern for compromising someone's view, I don't believe there would be any docks in South Carolina. But the fact of the matter is that docks have to be adapted sometimes as conditions change. And I think that's the case here. And I want to advocate for the approval of the permit.
Thank you, Mr. Beck. We will next call upon Trey Floyd. Trey Floyd, if you can unmute.
Yeah, can everybody hear me?
Yes, sir. Please proceed.
Hey, I want to state that I am on board with Mr. Manzi's application to extend the dock. I'll keep it short and sweet, but as somebody who has grown up here and been a resident for 25 years and spent a lot of time kayaking and paddleboarding, I've never found a creek that I couldn't navigate through and get under a dock. So I wanted to put it out there that I do not believe that putting the dock is going to prohibit anybody from traveling around So as far as my point, I think we need to go ahead and extend this dock. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Floyd. Next, we will call upon Latasha Owens. You can unmute by clicking the microphone on your screen.
Hi,
Ms. Owens?
hello?
Yes, we can hear you. Go
Yes,
ahead.
can you, okay, great, thank you. I'm Latasha Owens, and I am in favor of the dock permit extension. I am a dock owner, boat owner, I paddleboard, kayak, and I know that there are at least 5 docks on the island that are considerably longer than the extension proposed by Mr. Manzi. And I don't, why should every other single family house on the island have access to navigable water and not his property just because he's beside the condos? I'll be emailing in my full comments, but at this time, I just want to state that I am in favor of the dock permit. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Owens. Next, we will hear from Mr. Jake Johnson. Mr. Johnson, if you can unmute by clicking the microphone or using *6 if you're.
I am Latasha Owens, Jake's wife, and he's unable to attend, but he will be emailing his comments. He is also in favor of the dock permit.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for letting us know and for encouraging him to email those comments in.
Thank you.
Next, we will call on Melanie Manzi.
Hi. Yes, I'd like to speak in favor of the dock extension. I've been going out to this property for about 5 years now, and I am an avid water person. I think this is why I moved to Charleston, is because the beauty of the water, the docks, the recreation. This is what Charleston is about. And I have watched that creek shrink to nothing over the last several years. And to be honest, I'm not sure I've ever seen anybody in that creek because there is not enough water to navigate any type of recreation or crabbing or fishing. So I'm very much in favor of Mr. Manzi extending the dock and being able to take advantage of this great place that we live in like many other people do. And I'll be sending the rest of my comments in as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we will hear from Lucy Dunlap. Ms. Dunlap, you can unmute by clicking the microphone or using *6 if you're joining us by phone.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am. Go ahead.
Yes, this is Lucy Dunlap, and yes, I have known the Manzis for a long, long time, and I am totally in favor of their permit application. They have already stated earlier this evening that they will make sure the dock allows for kayakers to go under it, and I have no doubt that it will be correct as far as the environment goes. I live on Clark Sound here on James Island, and we have lots and lots of docks up and down, and they, number one, I enjoy looking at them, and two, they have not kept anyone from enjoying the water. So I don't think you could get another couple people who would do a better job of building a dock that would be appropriate, attractive, and would allow people to come and go as need be. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, we will hear from James Trousseau. Mr. Trousseau, I hope I'm pronouncing your last name correctly. Please correct me if I am wrong.
No, you are. You are. Thank you so much. I'm Dr. Jim Trousseau, 254 Little Oak Island Drive, the direct property adjacent to the proposed dock extension of 267 Little Oak Island. I'm also currently serving as a board member on both the Little Oak Community Board and the Little Oak Villa Board. However, with that in mind, Sue and I are speaking only as adjacent property owners and not as board members to this proposal. In 1993 and subsequently in 1995, we bought 2 properties on Little Oak Island. One of those properties was an island lot number 7 facing Quahog Creek and the Folly Beach Island. The second property was a 3-bedroom, 3-bath end unit villa next door to the proposed dock extension and also facing Folly Beach. Both properties were purchased with the knowledge that if we built a home on lot 7, we could also build a tidal creek dock approximately 50 feet long onto Quahog Creek. Likewise, when we purchased our 3-bedroom, 3-bath villa, we spent an extra amount of money to have an end unit villa and an unobstructed view of the marsh and adjacent waterway. We understand DHAC in determining any dock proposal or extension is not necessarily concerned with a view obstruction as a primary determination of granting permits. However, everyone in this virtual meeting considers location as one of the primary reasons when purchasing a home. Most people would not buy a home with a telephone pole obstructing their view or a blinking storefront sign lighting up their living room. Likewise, Sue and I did not buy our villa home with a view of a 135-foot dock with a 20-foot high ground gourd birdhouse. What is unusual about this dock extension request is that the lot and dock in question is angled in such a way that as it is extended, it will cross over the site view of several villas in Building 5 and perhaps decreasing the site value of their homes. Although quality of life is not a valued issue in granting dock extension permits, it does play an extremely important part of our lives along with the use of the tidal creek for our tandem sea kayak, 2 paddle boards, and used by our children and grandchildren. The extension will cause both. Thank you for the opportunity to express our views on this matter. An additional note, in the mid-1990s, the property owner at that time requested a permit from DHAC to build a 150-foot dock over Quahog Creek. Letters were sent by DHAC to the adjacent property of 253, 254, and 269 about the proposed dock. Since all 3 property owners said no to the request, the permit was issued for a 50-foot dock to the existing Quahog Creek, which is the current dock in question. Thank you again for this public hearing, and I will send this document in also. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Trusso. Next, we will hear from Robert Dillon. Mr. Dillon, you can unmute by using the microphone on your screen, microphone icon, or using *6 if you're joining us by phone.
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
I sure can. Thank you.
Super. I'm Rob Dillon. I was a professor in the biology department at the College of Charleston for 33 years. I retired in 2016. And through that period of time, my primary specialty was in genetics and evolutionary biology. But it turns out that right after graduate school, I was awarded a congressional fellowship with AAAS, work on Capitol Hill, on Section 404 of the Clean Water Act, which has to do with wetlands. I worked on Capitol Hill for a year and on a report for the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee. And it turns out that as of the 80s, there had been no evidence to support a hypothesis that any sort of development activities in the wetlands could negatively impact a population. Dr. Manzi has sent me the big packet of comments that have been submitted to you, and I counted 11 interference with strand feeding of dolphins. 11 of the comments mentioned the dolphin thing. 9 of them mentioned interfering with shorebird or waterfowl feeding. And I am just here to reassure you all that These are not a concern. That may seem surprising at first blush, but actually, to give it a second thought, in order to support a hypothesis that the dolphin or the shorebird would be negatively impacted, you'd need first an estimate of population size, and heaven knows the bottlenose dolphin's a worldwide species, and heaven knows what the population size is, but shall we say 10 million? I don't know. Then you'd need to work out whether that population was at the carrying capacity of the environment. You need to know how many dolphin the world fit. That would be another very difficult experiment to do. And what we generally find with other organisms is that populations are not at the carrying capacity. And in that case, then they are increasing at their intrinsic rate of natural increase, and they're not limited. But if you knew how many dolphins there were, and if they were indeed at the carrying capacity of the environment, then you would need to figure out what's the limiting factor. Could it be predation? Could it be competition? Could it be food? It seems highly unlikely to me that habitat will be limiting the dolphins. But even if it did, even if you jumped over all four of those hurdles, and you knew how many dolphins there were, and you knew what the carrying capacity is, and you knew that it was habitat that was limiting, well, what you do is you create a fraction. You put the total 100 meters, 100 square meters in the numerator. You put the total environment inhabited by the worldwide population of dolphin in the denominator. You multiply that by the total number of dolphins, and
we do have a 3-minute time mark there. So
thank you. You understand that these concerns are ill-founded. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Dillon. Please, we do encourage you to submit your comments in writing through our comment portion of the e-permitting webpage, which can be found at that Manzi webpage that is located on the screen right now. And I will remind everyone, we do have a 3-minute time limit. We have a few more folks that have registered to speak, and I will ask others who have decided to speak to indicate that at a later time. The next person we will call upon is Mr. Seth Eisenberg. Mr. Eisenberg, if you are with us, you can unmute by clicking the microphone icon or using *6.
I'm here. Thank you very much.
Great.
I am the son-in-law of the owner of the next door neighbor for the applicant. Her name is Joe Pachulik, and I'm speaking on her behalf. But, we know that a lot of neighbors and folks have had a lot to say tonight, and we have spoken with the applicant before, but we really hadn't had the opportunity to hear any of the voices from the other residents of Little Oak Island and other owners. So we definitely appreciate everybody's time. We appreciate the committee's time, but we'll actually defer and surrender our time to speak, and if necessary, submit a written comment as you just illustrated that could be done until September, I believe September 29th. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Yes, that is correct. You can submit written comments through September 29th, 2020, and those can be submitted at the webpage that is available on the screen right now through the e-permitting web link there. They also could be emailed to the project manager, Sarah Reed. Her email address is also on the screen, and they could be mailed to the DHEC office there in North Charleston. Next, we will hear from Chris Cushman. Chris Cushman?
I'm here.
Great. Thank you so much. Please proceed.
Thank you. My name is Chris Cushman. My wife and I bought the property at 259 Little Oak Island Drive in 1997, built a house in 1999, and have lived on Little Oak Island full-time since 2005. For the past 23 years, I have been powerboating, canoeing, kayaking, paddleboarding, and sailing in the waters around Little Oak Island and the Folly River. Hundreds of excursions with neighbors and family, totaling hundreds of hours on the water. I have witnessed no change in the navigable depth of the water in Quahog Creek. At the end of the applicant's current dock, there is Spartina grass that is quite visible at lower tides. But for example, a 5.5 high tide would allow the applicant approximately a 4.5-hour window to use a power boat and approximately 5 hours to use a kayak or paddleboard with the current dock. There is approximately a foot more water at the end of the proposed dock extension. So with a 5.5 foot high tide, there would be approximately 5.5 hours to launch a power boat and 6 hours to launch a kayak or paddleboard. But I say launch, not use, because as was mentioned earlier, there is a growing sandbar just east of where the proposed dock would end. This would make navigating a power boat to the deeper water of the Folly River problematic, and likely more so in the future. As also mentioned earlier, there are small cuts that connect the Quahog Creek and the unnamed tidal creek the proposed dock extension would reach. However, the aforementioned sandbar just east of the proposed dock extension partially blocks the one cut, and another sandbar just to the west of the proposed dock extension partially blocks the other cut. This second cut in front of the villas also has a sandbar and oyster bed that is growing and is gradually blocking this cut. In conclusion, I oppose the applicant's dock extension because it would cross one tidal creek to reach another tidal creek with little or no boating benefit to the applicant. In addition, I oppose the dock extension because the boating residents of Little Oak Island and the greater Folly Beach community will be negatively impacted by limiting navigation on Quahog Creek and the surrounding waterways. I have one final comment. I do appreciate the picture earlier of that 1955 Grumman canoe and the 1955 3-horsepower Evinrude motor. My dad bought those in 1955. He was an avid boater and environmentalist, as am I. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Mr. Cushman. I will ask everyone to remain muted and to turn off your cameras until it is your turn to speak. And our next speaker will be Christine Wilkerson. Ms. Wilkerson, if you can unmute by the microphone icon on your screen or by using *6 on your phone. Is Ms. Wilkerson attending tonight? All right, we may go on and come back to her. Our next speaker will be Susan Jordan.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
We can hear you.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity. I am opposed to the dock extension for a variety of reasons, some of which I'm going to eliminate tonight because they've already been mentioned, and I will put it in the documents that I send to you later. But the dock extension will block access for myself, other residents and visitors to either paddle, boat, or kayak on Quahog Creek, which runs parallel to Little Oak Island, as we know. It also does add a protective kayaking or paddle experience, as we can stay close to the island and circumnavigate it. There is a real possibility that the proposed dock extension will have an unknown, and even the experts are saying an unknown effect on the sandbars, which are constantly moving, the redistribution, existing oyster beds, dolphin strand feeding, I will mention, which occurs in the immediate area. As the committee is well aware, the tidal marsh is a living, breathing, ever-evolving entity and is constantly changing. And in such a volatile area, the sandbars, pluff mud, and tidal grasses are constantly moving, growing, and adding to the enrichment of nature and nature's habitat. I have a real concern, it's unknown at this point, but I have a real concern where the bulkhead is at the end of the proposed dock because of the sandbars on both sides of it, because of the moving pluff mud, grasses, and the sandbars constantly moving, that we would even have room to go around the dock in a boat, paddleboard, or a kayak. That is a real concern that I have now that has not been addressed. All of the residents at this time enjoy access from their seawalls to boat approximately 3 hours, and that's approximate, but at least 3 hours, prior and after high tide. The amount of time that the proposed dock will add to Mr. Manzi's boating time appears to be insignificant at best, possibly a half hour in addition. It is well documented that community board must grant permission for the dock extension to be built. I don't believe that permission will be granted. We all have deep water access approximately 6 hours of each day unless we are experiencing extremely low tide. The picture that Mr. Manzi showed of literally dry dock is at low tide. I have pictures that I've submitted already to the committee, and that shows that was 2 hours after high tide today as of this morning. And that is just not, that does not show a true picture of any water, not only in Quahog Creek, but in the adjacent creek that he is proposed to go out to. So I do question how much time that's going to give him. So I would like to reference the 2 photos that the committee has in file. And I don't know what number Mr. Manzi's photo is, but it's the one showing the dry dock. Little Oaks photos number 14 and 15. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Ms. Jordan. And yes, we do encourage you to submit those comments as well as any photos or exhibits that you have to our comment portion of the e-permitting webpage that can be found at scdhec.gov/Manzi. I would like to go back and see if Ms. Wilkerson has joined us. Ms. Wilkerson, if you are on the phone, press *6 to unmute your line.
Okay, great. I think you can hear me now.
Yes, ma'am. Please proceed.
I have looked at Mr. Manzi's dock. I grew up on Folly Beach, and, you know, when we were kids, we used to pull a seine in those creeks. We used to go out there and catch all our food. We used to fish. We used to crab. I think having access to the water is really important, and it's one of the reasons why we live here. And it's a great recreational activity for the family. I understand the concerns of the people around him, but Mr. Manzi's particular spot is not navigable. I mean, nobody wants to paddle a kayak through there or fish or crab. His dock just needs to go a little bit farther out to where the creek is, where the larger portion of that creek is, where he can access the water and do the same things that his neighbors are talking about being able to do. It's clear from the drone picture that was taken is that his particular area is not accessible. And I mean, we're not talking about, you know, dragging power boats in and out of there. I mean, you could have a small boat without any problem and just have the ability to do some fishing and crab and hang out there with your family. It's so important right now during this, you know, pandemic that we're going through to have these activities to do with our kids and, you know, go ahead and pass on this knowledge to them too while we have the opportunity. So I think it's a bit unfair that his neighbors are ganging up on him just because they think it's going to ruin their view a little bit. It's really sad. But I mean, I know him. He's a rabid environmentalist. I don't know anyone else who has built a house like his that basically powers itself and his car. I don't think he would do anything to hurt the environment. And I am, you know, of course, obviously think, you know, he should have his application approved. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wilkerson. That concludes everyone who has pre-registered to comment. We will now provide an opportunity for those of you who did not register but would like to provide a comment for the record. In a moment, I will ask anyone who would like to be recognized to please indicate by raising your hand, by clicking the hand icon on the floating toolbar, or if you have called into the meeting, please unmute your line by pressing *6. Our tech team will be watching for raised hands and unmuted phone lines, and we will recognize you in the order that we see them. Once you've raised your hand or unmuted your line, please refrain from speaking until you're called upon or by either your name or your last 4 digits of your phone number. If we experience a lot of background noise, we may need to mute those lines. When it is your turn to speak, please clearly state and spell your name. If you have already spoken tonight, we will like to call on those who we have not heard from first, and then if we have time, we may try to get back to those who have already had an opportunity to speak. Okay, at this time, I do see some raised hands. I think we have Mr. Robert Benazzi first. You may unmute and proceed. You'll have 3 minutes.
All right, I'm here. Can you hear me?
I can. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you for this opportunity. I did register to speak earlier. I was told that somehow my time was given away or something. I don't know. But anyway, I did sign in. I wish everyone good evening. My name is Robert Benazzi, Bonazzi. I am a member of the board of the Little Oak Island Community Association. My wife and I have lived at 238 or live at 238 Little Oak Island Drive, and we've owned this property since 2011. Just as many of my members of the community have wondered, what is it that is the gain by extending this dock to the proposed location? For that reason, I've taken measurements in the area of Mr. Manzi's existing dock on Quahog Creek and in the area of the proposed pierhead. It appears that there is actually very little to gain by locating a pierhead at the projected point, about 6 inches increase in water depth. The illustrations that were provided by Mr. Manzi are clearly untrue. We, as you can see, have many pictures that indicate a much deeper extent. It is also untrue that that part of the area is unused. On very, very many occasions, I can tell you that about 10 to 12 community members meet on the Quahog Creek, and we circumnavigate the island. This is done on a regular basis. And why he claims that there's only 7 people who pass by there is an absolute absurdity in my mind. Now, Mr. Manzi has called the Quahog Creek an abandon in the communication to me, and I understand that that he was involved also in the development of this community and is responsible for naming this creek. The creek is not abandoned. It's used extensively, and there are paddle boarders, there are powered john boats that go through there all the time, and even kayaks that have the new style kayaks that have the foot paddle kayaks, and of course paddle boarders as well. This permit should not be allowed to obstruct this navigable, absolutely navigable creek. This proposed extension of the dock to the outer creek is further problematic because this creek has significant sandbars, as you have heard, and oyster beds. It is a major egress for wrack exiting the inner part of the marsh. That happens every year. Because the building of this dock would block Quahog Creek, potentially impact use of the second creek, and disrupt the tidal flow with little benefit to the homeowner, I, along with my fellow homeowners, strongly oppose this request. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Benazzi. Right on time. The next caller we will hear from is the phone number ending in 3466. 3466. If you're on your phone, you can use *6 to unmute.
Yes, this is Dr. Richard Beck again, speaking on behalf of my wife to say that she will submit her comments in writing.
Great. Thank you.
My wife is Karen Lovelace, by the way.
Great. Thank you. We will note that. All right, next we have Mr. Turney.
Yeah, it's Al Tierney. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. I apologize. Thank
That's
you.
okay. That's okay. I live on Little Oak Island. I've heard a lot of people commenting for this dock who do not live on Little Oak Island, although this is a state hearing, so that doesn't really matter. It does to me. The point I'd like to make is one that's been made before, which is I kayak all the time. My wife and I kayak. We paddleboard through here. We go right by Mr. Manzi's dock anytime there's high tide, which is what you have to do around here for anything. And we also paddle around the section that he wants to go to. And as everybody said before, there's no difference. There's sandbars there. When I take a kayak that draws 6 inches of water, I have to be careful unless I'm at full high tide, and it's a good high tide, going through there because I'll hit the sandbars with my kayak. And I just don't see what a point is where you may gain a few minutes to a half an hour of tide out there, and you don't even have the kind of sandbars close up to where he's at. But we paddle by his current dock all the time, and we also paddle by where he wants to go. There's no difference except that you're going to stick 134 feet of wood out there, and I'll use his technical term. The stuff that he put forward was baloney. And I oppose this dock vehemently because it gains nothing. I don't know if he's doing it so he can sell his home and say he has a water dock and lie to whoever buys his home. But I don't know why he's doing it, but I oppose it. And thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, we will call upon Bob Wiggins.
Hello.
Hello.
How are you?
Good,
Thank you very much for letting us do this tonight. My name is Robert Wiggins, and I live at 274 Little Oak Island on Polly Beach. I actually live on the opposite side of the island from the Manzis. I am a current board member, and I have been for 13 years. I served as its president for 4 years, and I've been a resident on this island for over 20 years. I would like to go on record as saying that so far you've heard from numerous homeowners that live here on the island, and not one has spoken in favor of Mr. Manzi's dock, and everyone that has spoken in favor of Mr. Manzi's dock does not live here on the island. I would like that to go on record at this point in time. They have not seen the conditions that exist out here. The pictures that Mr. Manzi submitted do depict Spartina grass at low tide. I live on the opposite side of the island. When I bought my lot, I realized that it was a tidal creek. I have several boats. I've been boating in the waters around South Carolina for over 50 years. I know that it's a tidal creek. I know what my parameters are as far as access to my dock. I have a lift on my dock. I can't go out but maybe 4 hours at a time, 2 hours on high, 2 hours on rising tide, and 2 hours on falling tide. So when he built his dock or bought his lot with that dock on it, he knew those parameters existed. I don't have access to deep water, and the dock that he has proposed to submit or has submitted for construction will not give him access to deep water. There is no deep water out there. It's 6 inches deeper than the water he has on high tide in front of his current dock. My suggestion would be for him to enlarge his pier head on his existing dock and put a single pile lift on that dock. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. All right, next we will hear from Colden Batty.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Please proceed.
Yeah, Colden Batty, COLDEN BATTEY. In light of the time and the number of speakers we have, I'll be brief. I'd just like to go on the record as being in favor of the permit application, and I will be sending in my comments supporting that to the email address. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. Our next speaker is listed as a guest, first name John. If you could please state your last name before you begin your comments. John, guest?
That could be me, John Carter, Carter. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir, we can.
Thank you. Thank you in OCRM for having this hearing. I've heard all the comments in favor of Mr. Manzi, and I agree. I support the proposal, and I won't add any additional comments because everything I was going to say has already been said. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Our next commenter will be from the phone line ending in 3886. Last four digits of the phone number ending 3886. You can use *6 to unmute your line.
Yes, ma'am. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir, we can. Please state your name for us.
My name is Jack Hunt, Hunt, and I'm speaking for myself and my wife. Her name is Susan Hunt.
Great. Please proceed.
Okay, I've been to John and Judy's house many times, and it's obvious that their dock is surrounded by marsh grass. There is no creek at the pier head of the dock that can be used for any real water-related activity as far as fishing or shrimping or even launching a boat as far as that goes. So I just wanted to let you know that my wife and I are both in favor and in favor of them getting the permit to extend the dock.
Thank you, Mr. Hunt.
Thank you.
Our next commenter is Annie Benazzi.
Hi, can you hear me?
We sure can. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Annie Benazzi, Bonazzi. I would just like to add my voice to the many Little Oak Island residents in opposition to Dr. Manzi's proposed dock. I personally have used the navigable creek at issue multiple times. It does in fact exist. I have found it particularly helpful for safe return to our condo during times of high winds. I think that the board should place appropriate weight on the comments of those who are residents of Little Oak Island. And with that, I will yield my time.
Thank you, Ms. Benazzi. Next, we have Mr. David Manzi. Is Mr. David Manzi on the phone or joining through computer?
Right now?
Yes.
Great.
Please proceed.
I appreciate it. John and Judy are obviously my parents. I am going to submit my comments through the email, but I just wanted to say, as I was listening to this, is I am very surprised at the many homeowners and property owners that have mentioned all the utilization of Quahog Creek. I've been visiting that property for the last 7 years since my parents moved in there. Been there hundreds of times in those years. And in all of those days, we have probably seen a kayak or somebody utilizing that creek less than 5 times. If I was going to guess a number, I'd say 3. But I just wanted to say that I'm so surprised to hear so many people utilizing the creek, but yet I've never seen it in all the times we've been there. I will submit the rest. I appreciate it. I do advocate for the approval of this project. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. Next, we will hear from John Vina.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity to speak. Good evening. I'm Dr. John Vina, resident of Folly Beach at 241 Little Oak Island Drive in the Villas. John Manzi's property at 267 is immediately adjoining to the property owned by and represented by the Little Oak Condominium Owners Association. I submitted a written statement January 23rd, 2020 in opposition to the dock extension. I'm testifying in strong opposition to this proposal as former president of the association and on behalf of the Villa Board as a current board representing 36 Villa owners. The Little Oak Condominium Owners Association Board passed a motion to formally oppose the permit request. Our opposition is based on facts and many detrimental consequences of the proposed dock extension, included but not limited to, it will block access to the waterway along the shore, which is widely used for kayaking and paddleboarding and boating, not only for residents of Little Oak, but also residents and visitors to the Folly Beach area, including folks who rent kayaks and paddleboard companies from local companies. By restricting access to the waterway along the shore, it would push recreational users further out in the marsh, a safety concern, especially for children, and also may affect water emergency response. The proposed structure would severely affect tidal flow in that area of the marsh, which flows into Quahog Creek. And the proposed dock could have a dramatic effect on the tidal dynamics, altering the marsh structure in front of our property. Most importantly, the approval of this permit would set a bad precedent for other dock extensions island-wide. These are just a few of the reasons that we oppose the dock extension. So the Little Oak Condominium Owners Association Board, and me personally as a villa owner, an avid kayaker, fisherman, and as an environmental scientist, therefore request disapproval of the permit request for 267 LOI Drive. We appreciate your consideration of our concerns. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Vina. Next, we'd like to hear from Tony Blanchard.
Hi, this is Tony Blanchard. I would like to speak on behalf of Dr. Manzi. I've known him for probably close to 30 years. He's a great steward of the land and cares very much about the environment and is very knowledgeable, birds, fish, everything. I respect him greatly. Everybody talks about there's no big difference in the amount of water that's available if he moves his boat a mere 133 feet. But if you notice from the photos rather, he's going into like a basin of a creek that's kind of open where you could actually catch trout, flounder, bass, crabs. What I'm seeing at any of the tides is that you're full of Spartina. You really don't have a lot of use on the dock. So I vote in favor of him. He knows what he's doing. He's offered to arch the dock to allow passage for whatever. I know that the dock pylons are typically 10 feet apart. So easily a kayak with 18 to 24 inches of beam can easily pass underneath that dock. So I do vote in favor for him.
Thank you, Mr. Blanchard. We have someone in the chat indicating they would like to speak by the initials DT. If you can unmute your line either on the phone or on the computer by clicking the microphone icon, you may have 3 minutes for your comment. Initials DT. If you could indicate that you would like to speak by raising your hand using the hand icon on the floating toolbar, or using your phone, you can hit *6 and that will unmute your line and we will recognize that as a means of raising your hand. I'm not seeing any other hands being raised or lines unmuted. If you are having difficulty with muting or unmuting your line, we do encourage you to submit your comments in writing by visiting scdheck.gov/Manzi and clicking Submit a Comment under Downloads and Links. You may also submit those comments in writing to the project manager using the addresses on your screen through mail or email. Oh, I do see a hand raised. Looks like Mr. Wiggins. I do believe you have spoken earlier, but as we see no other hands raised or lines unmuted, I will allow you to speak again.
Hello, mine's short and sweet. I just want to reiterate and emphasize again that there have been 16 people speak in favor of Mr. Manzi's dock, and not one of them lives on Little Oak Island. That's all I have to say. Thank you for your time.
Are there any others who have not already spoken that would like to make a comment tonight? Okay, I see Mr. Trousseau and Miss Jordan indicating they would like to speak again.
Laura, we also have an Abigail Shipman with her hand raised, and I don't believe we've heard from her this evening.
Okay, I apologize. I did not see that. Yes, thank you. Ms. Shipman, would you like to proceed with your comment?
Yes, it is both I, Abby Shipman, and my husband, Daniel Shipman, here on the line.
So just early on, it was mentioned that this was the condos who opposed it. I just want to make it very clear that is not true. I don't live in a condo. I've lived in a house. We've lived in a house for over 5 years. We've been property owners, I think, in Little Oak for over 6 years. And we absolutely very often kayak right by his dock. So to the people saying they haven't seen it but 3 times, I invite you to come out.
In addition to that, our other comment would be a safety concern for those who are kayaking, canoeing, or
boating in general
down the creek. If we are to still be able to use Quahog Creek, to go underneath the dock would not be appropriate. We do have 3 small children who are learning to kayak and love the water, and that cannot be possible by going underneath the dock during changing tides, where it is very hard to navigate underneath the dock, and that will not be possible if he puts it 150 feet out from his house. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Shipman. Blair, I see no other attendees indicating they'd like to make an oral comment at this time. Would you like to proceed?
Yes, this is Blair again. I want to thank everyone who made a comment tonight and who spoke. For the record, this is very valuable information for us. And if you have already made a comment and would like to make another comment, please, I would encourage you to go ahead and submit comments as we had indicated earlier via the e-permitting web link or by email and or by regular mail. So Laura, again, thank you. And I want to thank everybody who attended tonight. The record of the public hearing will be kept open until September 29th, 2020. So please submit any additional comments visiting scdhec.gov/Manzi and clicking submit a comment under downloads and links, or by email or mail by that date. Again, I want to thank everyone for attending tonight, and I hope y'all have a very nice evening. Take care.